Welcome back to our channel.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe as we dive into a story of courage high above the clouds, where she was just 16 years old, a high school girl with braided hair and wide, curious eyes, when the calm night sky above the Arabian Sea suddenly turned into the most dangerous place she had ever been. The night sky over the Arabian Sea shimmered like a blanket of black velvet sprinkled with drifting silver dust. Beneath those quiet stars, Skyroute Flight 409, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, carved its way through the high-altitude winds at 37,000 feet. Inside the cabin, most passengers slept in silence, soft breathing, dim lights, blankets rising and falling with slow rhythm. Only a faint hum of the engines reminded everyone they were flying through a world where nothing should go wrong. But on seat 22A, someone was wide awake. Her name was Alina, a 16-year-old high school girl from Lahore, small, bright eyes, braided hair, a shy smile, the kind of girl who loved science documentaries more than parties. Tonight was her first solo trip abroad. She was traveling to Tokyo for a robotics competition, something she'd dreamed of since she was 11. She felt proud, nervous, excited, scared, but above all, she felt grown up. Alina sat by her favorite place, the window seat. She pressed her forehead gently to the cold glass as she watched the world far below disappear into darkness. She whispered softly, "Someday I'll build planes, not just fly in them." That's what she thought this flight would be, a step toward her future. But destiny had prepared something else, something far bigger, something she never expected, something that would make headlines around the world. Halfway through the flight, as the cabin lights dimmed to deep amber, Alina felt something unusual, a slight vibration under her feet. Nothing big. Nothing dangerous. Just different. She blinked and glanced around. The elderly lady beside her slept soundly, her hands wrapped around a tasbih. Across the aisle, a toddler snored softly against his mother's arm. Far ahead, a flight attendant quietly adjusted the curtain separating economy from business class. Everything looked normal. And yet, something felt off. Alina straightened slightly and looked at her window. Her breath hitched. In the lower corner of the triple-layered acrylic glass, something thin and sharp glimmered under the moonlight. A tiny line, almost invisible. A hairline fracture. She leaned closer, her heartbeat slowly rising. No, this can't be," she whispered. She touched the surface lightly. The glass was smooth on the inside, but she could see the faintest distortion underneath, like a crack forming between the layers. To anyone else, it was nothing. But to her, to a girl who'd spent years studying aviation because she wanted to become an engineer, this wasn't nothing. It was a warning. At 37,000 feet, even a small structural issue could turn into a life-threatening event. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Should she tell someone? Or was she overthinking it? Her father's voice echoed in her head. "Alina, if something feels wrong, speak up. Even if everyone thinks it's small." Her fingers trembled as she raised her hand slightly. Flight attendant noticed and walked over. "Yes, sweetheart? Something you need?" Alina hesitated, her voice soft, careful. I think there might be a crack on the window." The attendant leaned in, eyebrows rising slightly. She inspected the corner carefully. For a brief second, her professional smile faded. But only for a second. "Thank you for telling me," she said gently. "Stay calm. I'll inform the cockpit. No panic. No drama, just quiet urgency." The attendant walked away, and Alina felt her stomach twist into a knot. Because she knew, flight attendants only changed their tone like that when something was real. The crack in the window had grown more noticeable now, a jagged white line stretching across the lower edge of the triple pane glass. Alina's heart pounded as she pressed her hand lightly against the cold acrylic. Every vibration from the engines made the fracture quiver like a live wire. Tiny shards of tension dancing in the moonlight. The cabin, once calm and sleepy, was beginning to stir. A soft hiss of air whispered near her seat. Subtle, almost inaudible, but Alina noticed it immediately. Her instinct screamed, "This isn't normal." She glanced around. Passengers were still largely unaware. The elderly lady beside her slept peacefully. Across the aisle, a toddler murmured in his mother's arms. Even the flight attendants moved with practiced calm, masking the urgency. But Alina saw it, felt it. The danger was real. At the front of the cabin, the flight attendant, who had checked the window earlier, whispered hurriedly into her radio. Alina could hear the low murmur of conversation from the cockpit. The plane suddenly lurched slightly, and the overhead lights flickered for a brief second. A ripple of confusion passed through the passengers. Alina gripped her notebook tightly. Her mind raced. If the crack spreads, the cabin could depressurize. She remembered the lessons from her aviation club about pressure differential, window layers, and the catastrophic effect even a small failure could have. The flight attendant returned to Alina's row, kneeling beside her. "Ma'am, I need you to remain calm," she said softly, her professional tone trembling slightly. "We're monitoring the situation." Alina nodded, trying to steady her breath, but her eyes never left the window. Every second, the crack seemed to inch outward. Then she noticed something worse. A tiny bubble of condensation was forming along the inner layer of the window. Slowly, imperceptibly, it was growing. Alina's stomach tightened. This wasn't just a crack anymore, it was a failure in progress. Inside the cockpit, the tension was palpable. Captain Daichi Mori and First Officer Anika Sato stared at the instruments, their faces pale under the glow of the digital panels. The attendant's report had confirmed the crack, and now cabin pressure readings were subtly shifting. "Reduce altitude slowly," Mori said, voice firm but strained. "Keep the passengers unaware for now." Anika nodded, hands steady on the controls, but the autopilot system began showing minor fluctuations. The plane's behavior was unusual. Nothing catastrophic yet, but it was unpredictable. Mori's experience told him the window could fail at any moment if the crack spread further. A rapid depressurization would leave the passengers and crew exposed to life-threatening conditions before they could descend. And there was one problem they couldn't solve immediately. They couldn't see the exact condition of the crack from the cockpit. All they had was Alina's report and the flight attendant's observation. Alina's mind worked frantically. She knew the cockpit couldn't see the crack clearly. They relied on her observation, the one person closest to the window. She whispered to the attendant, "Tell the pilots the crack is spreading faster. There's a bubble forming on the inner layer, too." The flight attendant blinked. You can see that?" "Yes, it's moving. It's spreading." Alina's voice was steady, but her fingers shook. It could fail in minutes. "You need to descend faster." The attendant nodded, voice tense. "Stay calm. I'll relay this immediately." Alina's mind then jumped to another concern, the passengers. Panic could escalate quickly. She looked around discreetly, noticing the first stirrings of alarm. A young couple whispered anxiously. Some passengers shifted in their seats, sensing the slight vibration. Alina took a deep breath. She had no authority, no formal training, but she realized one thing. If she stayed quiet, it could be too late. As the plane slowly descended, the crack grew more obvious. The bubble along the inner layer had doubled in size. The subtle hiss turned into a faint whistle of escaping air, audible only to those sitting nearby. Alina's heart raced. She could almost feel the window flex under pressure. It was a terrifying reminder. The cabin was vulnerable, and the passengers' lives depended on the crew taking the right action, guided by her observation. Suddenly, the autopilot gave a warning beep. The plane shuddered, a slight tremor moving through the cabin. A few passengers woke fully now, sensing that something was wrong. The first whispers of panic began to spread. Alina stayed calm even as fear clawed at her chest. She realized she had to project confidence, and if she panicked, others would too. She focused on the crack, watching its subtle movements, noting the speed at which it was spreading. The flight attendant returned after relaying Alina's observation. "They're adjusting descent speed, but they need more details," she said quietly. Alina nodded. She remembered her lessons in school, her hours studying aviation systems online. She whispered instructions. "The crack is not just horizontal. It's branching upward along the inner layer. The pressure is causing the bubble to expand. Slow descent is not enough. They need to reduce altitude quickly to relieve stress." The attendant's eyes widened. "You understand this? You're guiding the cockpit?" Alina swallowed. "Yes, I can see it. I know what it might do if we don't act now." The attendant relayed her words immediately. Inside the cockpit, the pilots adjusted the descent rate. Annika's hands moved with careful precision. Guided by Alina's observations, the plane descended more rapidly, the seatbelt signs flashing. Some passengers looked alarmed. Alina's mother gripped her hand tightly. Alina whispered to her, "Stay calm. Don't panic. Everything will be okay if we follow instructions." Her words carried a surprising weight. Calm radiated from her, even as her eyes tracked the growing crack. She realized that her courage, her attention to detail, was the only thing standing between chaos and safety. The hiss grew louder. A soft vibration moved through the window. A few drops of condensation formed along the edges, but thanks to her intervention, the descent was steady. The stress on the window minimized. She could feel a strange sense of determination rise inside her. She was just 16, yes, but right now, her mind, her observation, and her courage were all that stood between the plane and disaster. Minutes passed like hours. The crack no longer seemed tiny, it stretched like frozen lightning. Passengers whispered nervously. Cabin lights flickered again. The autopilot beeped warnings, but Alina stayed calm. She pressed her hand against her lap, focused entirely on the window, on the pressure, on the bubble forming along the inner layer. Somewhere in the cockpit, Captain Maury's voice was tense but controlled. "Good observation," he said quietly to the first officer. "Thanks to the passenger's report, we're stabilizing." Alina didn't hear this, but she felt it a quiet reassurance that her voice, her observation, her courage had mattered. She was just a girl, just 16, but right now, she was becoming a hero. And she knew this was only the beginning. The night was far from over, the danger still real, and the sky had not yet let them breathe freely. The soft hum of the engines had grown into a low, ominous vibration that rattled through the cabin. Alina's eyes never left the window. The crack had widened and jagged, branching across the lower edge like frozen lightning. Tiny bubbles along the inner layer shimmered faintly, moving as the aircraft flexed in flight. A hiss had grown into a faint whistle. The subtle noise was now audible to those seated nearby. A few passengers had glanced toward the window. Curiosity mixed with unease, but only Alina recognized the full scale of the danger. She pressed her fingers to her lap, heart hammering. Yet her voice remained calm when she whispered instructions to herself. "Observe. Calculate. Act." The plane shuddered suddenly. Overhead lights flickered. The subtle pressure change she had anticipated became obvious. A faint ringing in her ears. A slight tightness in her chest. She instinctively pressed the call button. The flight attendant arrived quickly, noticing Alina's urgent expression. "It's spreading," Alina said, pointing at the jagged white line. "The inner layer bubble. It's growing faster." The attendant's eyes widened. She glanced toward the cockpit before replying. "We're trying to stabilize it. Everyone, please remain calm." Alina's fingers gripped the seat. Armrests. Calm. Focused. Panic was contagious, but she needed to maintain control, both for herself and for those around her. Inside the cockpit, First Officer Anika Sato's hands shook slightly. The autopilot was giving intermittent warnings, struggling to maintain stability. In the sudden micro-turbulence and the unusual pressure dynamics caused by the cracked window, Captain Maury's voice was low but firm. "Anika, manual control. Keep her steady. Descend as fast as safely possible." Alina's mind raced. She had studied plane control systems for years in her aviation club. But this was real. They were thousands of feet above the ocean, and any misstep could be catastrophic. She leaned slightly toward the aisle, trying to see the cockpit door. Tell them the crack is now moving upward. If we don't descend faster, it might fail entirely." The attendant relayed her message immediately. Maury's hand hovered over the throttle, adjusting carefully, sweat glinting on his brow. A soft gasp echoed from the middle of the cabin. Someone had noticed the faint whistle of escaping air. Seatbelt signs flashed more urgently. The captain and crew hadn't yet made an announcement, but passengers were beginning to sense danger. Alina turned toward them. Her voice, though small, projected authority. "Please stay seated."
"Seatbelts fastened."
"Calm down, it will be okay." Passengers glanced at her, surprised by the confidence in the 16-year-old's tone. Her words carried weight, not command, but certainty. It calmed some of the fearful murmurs. Nearby, her mother grasped her hand tightly. "Alina, you're so brave." Alina swallowed, forcing her fear down. She had no time to be scared, not now. Not when hundreds of lives depended on her observation. A sudden shiver ran through the window. Tiny fragments of condensation shifted. The crack stretched longer and sharper. The hiss became a low, steady whistle, audible to almost everyone near the window. Alina's chest tightened. She leaned closer to observe the movement, her eyes trained to detect even the smallest expansion. Every second counted. If the inner layer failed, rapid depressurization could occur within moments. She noticed the pattern of expansion. It was not random. A specific section of the window's outer layer was taking more stress. She quickly memorized the positions, ready to relay it to the cockpit. The flight attendant returned, whispering in Alina's ear. "Captain Mori wants to know exactly which part is critical." Alina pointed toward the jagged upper branch of the crack. "Here, the top right section. That's where the bubble is largest. If it fails first, pressure will drop rapidly. You must stabilize this side immediately." The attendant nodded, rushing to relay the information. Alina's heart pounded as she watched them act. The descent was now faster but controlled. Passengers gripped armrests, murmuring prayers. Some began to cry softly. Alina's voice, calm and measured, continued. "Stay calm. Don't move. Keep your seatbelts fastened. Trust the crew." The plane gave a violent shudder. The cabin lights flickered violently. A passenger's coffee cup toppled, spilling onto the floor. Panic erupted in a few nearby seats. Alina's instincts kicked in. She pressed herself against the window seat and whispered a warning to the attendant. "It's moving faster. The bubble is splitting. Tell them to descend more aggressively but safely." The flight attendant nodded sharply, her hands shaking. She relayed the information immediately. Inside the cockpit, Mori and Annika exchanged tense glances. Adjustments were made, speed altered, flaps slightly shifted. The descent angle changed. Every maneuver required precision. One miscalculation could spell disaster. Alina's mind raced through every calculation she had learned. Cabin pressure differentials, structural stress points, airflow dynamics. Though she was only 16, the hours she had spent reading, studying, and dreaming about aviation now translated into real-time guidance. She whispered again. "The outer layer is flexing too much on the right side. Keep the descent angle shallow to relieve it." The attendant repeated her words. Captain Mori adjusted the plane's pitch fractionally. The shudder lessened. The crack remained stable for the first time in minutes. Passengers began to realize that the girl by the window wasn't just observing. She was saving lives with her mind and courage. Minutes passed with excruciating slowness. The crack no longer stretched as quickly. The hiss was still audible but less aggressive. Alina remained glued to the window, calculating, observing, giving instructions in whispers. Captain Mori glanced at the instruments, then toward the cockpit door. The girl's observations had directly prevented the crack from failing completely. She was guiding them through an emergency beyond what most adults could handle. Alina leaned back slightly, taking a deep breath. She was exhausted, terrified, and trembling, yet a spark of determination burned in her eyes. She had done the impossible. A 16-year-old girl was keeping an entire plane safe, and still the night wasn't over. The danger above the clouds was far from resolved. The crack had not failed, but every second brought a new threat. Alina's courage had saved them so far, but she knew the next few minutes would test her even more. The aircraft continued its emergency descent, slicing through the night air with a shaky urgency that every passenger could feel. Oxygen masks had not deployed yet, but Alina could hear the thin, sharp whistle coming from the cracked window, a sound that promised disaster if the pressure dropped even a little more. Her breathing was steady now, controlled. She had crossed the line between fear and duty. Every second mattered. Every observation she made could save them or doom them. A sudden vibration hit the cabin, and harder than before. Passengers cried out. An overhead bin popped partially open. A suitcase shifted, nearly falling, but a man caught it in time. Alina jerked forward, eyes locked on the window. The crack jumped, a full inch in one motion. A dangerously fast change. The hiss sharply intensified, louder than anything she had heard so far. Her ears popped painfully. Her mother grabbed her arm. "Alina, move away from it," she cried. But Alina didn't move. She couldn't. Not now. She leaned forward, analyzing the spiderweb-like pattern forming. She whispered, "Top right." "It's giving way." Her hands trembled. The flight attendant rushed toward her, kneeling beside the seat. "What do you see now?" she asked, panic barely contained. Alina pointed to the new branching crack. "This is the failure point. Tell the captain the pressure is escaping faster. They need a sharper descent, but still controlled. If they drop too fast, the window will burst. If they descend too slow, the cabin pressure will overpower it." The attendant stared at her in awe. You're saving us, she whispered. But Alina didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a girl holding back the ocean with her hands. Captain Mori and First Officer Anika were drenched in sweat. The alarms had stopped. But the silence was worse. It was the silence of systems failing in the background. When the attendant relayed Alina's message, Mori's eyes widened. A sharper but stable descent? How does she know this? She's the girl from seat 22A, the attendant said. 16 years old, but she understands what's happening better than anyone. Mori didn't hesitate. Then we trust her. He adjusted the pitch. The plane dipped lower, faster but still balanced. It was the type of maneuver that required years of experience. And a teenager's brilliant mind. The air thinned more rapidly now. Passengers gasped softly, clutching their seats. Babies began to cry. A woman fainted in row 14. Masks dropped automatically. A yellow forest of dangling oxygen. People scrambled to pull them on. Alina grabbed hers, slipping it over her face quickly. Her mother did the same beside her. But Alina didn't lean back. She leaned forward, mask in place, eyes on the weakening window. The crack was now shaking. The outer layer bowed slightly outward, a sign the pressure difference was too high. If it burst, decompression would rip through the cabin. Her mind raced. What angle eases stress during rapid descent? Which section of fuselage flexes most under load? How to minimize pressure strain? She whispered calculations to herself. She knew the answer. She unbuckled her seatbelt. Her mother panicked. Alina, no! But Alina shook her head. I have to tell them directly. There's no time. The attendant saw her standing in the aisle and rushed over. It's not safe. Alina cut her off. Please, just take me to the cockpit. If I speak directly, they can adjust instantly. The attendant hesitated only a moment. Then she grabbed Alina's hand. Come. They moved quickly down the swaying aisle, passengers staring at the brave teenager walking toward the cockpit as if she were carrying the fate of everyone on board. The cockpit door opened. Captain Mori turned, stunned. You're Alina. She nodded, breath shallow behind her mask. What do we do? He asked without hesitation. Alina pointed at the plane's pitch indicator. Keep descending, but keep the right side slightly stabilized. The crack is leaning that way. Too much stress there will break the window completely. Anika adjusted controls immediately. Mori nodded. Got it, right side stabilization. Alina stepped closer, gripping a handle to keep her balance. The air is escaping, but slower now. If we reach 9,000 feet, the window won't burst. You just have to hold it steady a little longer. Mori's voice softened. You're saving us, young lady. But Alina's voice shook when she replied, I just don't want anyone to die. The descent continued. 800 feet, 700, 500. The plane shook violently. A hollow boom echoed from somewhere under the fuselage. Anika's eyes widened. What was that? Stress pocket beneath the cabin, Alina said, gripping the panel. It's shifting. Don't change the pitch, not yet. The captain held steady. 9,300 feet, 9,100, 9,000. Then, the hiss stopped. The crack stayed still, frozen, stable. The cabin pressure equalized with the altitude. The window no longer fought to explode outward. They were safe, for the first time in 30 minutes. When they finally landed, emergency vehicles flooded the runway with blue lights. The cabin erupted into applause, tears, hugs, prayers. But all eyes turned to Alina, a 16-year-old high school girl, the one who refused to panic, the one who read the sky like a textbook, the one who saved every life on board. Captain Mori walked out of the cockpit. He placed his hand gently on Alina's shoulder. You didn't just help us, he said. You brought us home. Her mother hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. Alina, you saved a sky full of people. Alina didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired, human, grateful. But the world would soon know the truth. She was just 16, but she saved an entire plane with courage far beyond her years.